This 15th century image shows a man peeking through what is called the celestial sphere. There is a suggestion that another world exists alongside the man's everyday experience of his world. In many ways, this image provides a useful metaphor for the general notion of conditioning. In ordinary language, when it is said that a person has been conditioned, we mean that a person has been so heavily trained that they find themselves in a mindset from which there is no escape. They may not even have the awareness that escape is an option. The basic idea is more pervasive than you might think at first. For example, think of a feeling you get when you're on holidays. At some point on your holiday, when you are removed from your working environment, you look back, so to speak, and can see more clearly the groove that had become your everyday existence. When this happens, you are, metaphorically speaking, peeking out of your personal celestial sphere and noticing that the world is different than your original experience of it. Examples of dramatic changes in perspective occur when people change religion, when a loved one has died, or when we travel to unfamiliar cultures. In this section of the tutorial, we look at how commonplace illusions really are. We start with some familiar visual illusions and then examine instances where our understanding of the world in which we live, including ourselves, is also susceptible to illusion. Things are not always as they seem. This page shows examples of visual illusions that you'll find in most introductory psychology textbooks. They are presented here as a reminder of how we can be deceived into viewing the world. That is to say, what we see is dependent on how visual stimuli are arranged in the environment. In this section of the tutorial, we will explore other examples of illusions. This time the illusions referred to are called explanatory illusions. These are statements which, whilst fairly innocuous in normal social interaction, represent serious obstacles to the development of a science of behaviour. As with the visual illusions you saw earlier, the existence of these explanatory illusions highlights the extent to which we can be deceived in our view of the world. In the English language, as in most other Western languages, sentence structure demands that there is a noun and a verb in each sentence. For example, we say, he eats, she plays, the baby cries, the grandmother visits, the dog barks, the chicken pecks. This seems to make perfect sense when there is an agent, such as an animal or a human, that could behave in a variety of ways. The specific verb allows us to distinguish between the many possible behaviours of the agent by describing the specific behaviour he, she or it was engaged in. He eats means, among other things, that he is not drinking. Similarly, she plays means she is not working. The baby cries means she was not smiling. Interestingly, this is not the same in other languages. In the Native American language of the Hopi, for example, there are words that are like our verbs, but these are grouped by the length of time the behaviour lasts, such as wave, flame, puff of smoke. Thus the Hopi language has verbs that do not require an agent. In Western languages, the necessity of a noun, the agent for action, and a verb, the action, is problematic because it can leave us making statements that are imprecise. Consider these two sentences. The wind blows, a memory is remembered. In each of these examples, a noun is used as an agent for action and a verb is used for the action. However, on closer inspection, it is clear that on each occasion the noun is defined by the verb. Wind blows, memory is remembered. There is a good example of a mistake often made when this is not recognized. It comes in the form of a question you can ask children. Where does the wind go when it stops blowing? There is no such thing as wind without blowing. Wind is the blowing. Similarly, remembering is something we do. The relevance of the point being made for a science of human behaviour will become clearer later on. For now, consider another example of a sentence we use in everyday conversation. It is raining. Ask yourself, what is the it that is raining? Clearly there is no it, no actor, and we should really say rain is raining, but that wouldn't make much sense. Now, this is not just nitpicking or hair-splitting, because we also use this way of speaking when it comes to human activities. The most recent example you came across in this tutorial was the statement, I have a brain. Again, we can ask, what is the I that has? As soon as we try to answer this question, we run into trouble. But is there any point to this verbal exercise? Because surely everyone knows what is meant by these kinds of statements. Well, that may well be the case, but it is the implications of this sentence structure that is of concern. In science, we search for general laws of nature. If our sentence structure has the potential to set us off searching in the wrong direction, then it is best that we begin by giving our language special attention. After all, it is the conceptual baggage of our past that we aim to transcend through advancements in science. A good illustration of this point comes from an example in ancient times when it was believed that the agent of action was the homunculus. This entity was thought to reside inside a person's brain, and its role was to tell a person what to do. Arising directly from the illusion created by this sentence structure, this entity gained a foothold in the thinking of psychologists. Only this time it was called the mind. Although no one has ever seen a mind, it was thought to reside inside the person's brain, and its role was to tell a person how to behave. The mind was considered separate from the person. The mind was seen as the somehow mysterious agent of action, which in turn was expressed by the body. When we refer to changes in someone's behaviour, we do not hesitate to say, he has made up his mind, or she has changed her mind. These kinds of sentences are socially acceptable, but we can't really begin to look for this agent called mind because it is an illusion, a product of our language. Now, isn't that a hard one to swallow? After all those years of believing that you have a mind, you're being asked to take the blinkers off and question this assumption. To help you, just imagine the following scene. Imagine you're looking at a brain and you hear these words coming from it. I have a mind. Sound familiar? Let us suppose that a young girl saw a picture yesterday and when asked to describe it today, does so. What has happened? A traditional answer would run something like this. When she saw the picture yesterday, the girl formed a copy in her mind, which in fact was really all she saw. She encoded it in a suitable form and stored it in her memory, where it remained until today. When asked to describe the picture today, she searched her memory, retrieved the encoded copy and converted it into something like the original picture, which she then looked at and described. But do we do anything of the sort? The computer, together with information theory as designed to deal with physical systems, has made the metaphor of input, storage, retrieval, output fashionable. The struggle to make machines think like people has had the effect of supporting theories in which people think like machines. This quotation was taken from Skinner in 1977 in his paper Why I Am Not a Cognitive Psychologist. In the paper, Skinner suggested that the battery provides a good object lesson for exposing the fallacy of storage metaphors. In ordinary language, a battery is said to store electricity. If we take this ordinary language as the basis for our scientific investigations, then it would make perfect sense to open up a battery to find the electricity. In a later paper, Skinner in 1985 said the following. We put electricity into a battery and take it out when needed, but there is no electricity in the battery. When we put electricity in, so to speak, we change the battery, and it is a changed battery that supposedly puts out electricity when tapped. Organisms do not acquire behavior as a kind of possession. They simply come to behave in various ways. The behavior is not in them at any time. We say that it is emitted, but only as light is emitted from a hot filament. There is no light in the filament. In this short video clip, you can see what he means. So much for ordinary language and the metaphor of storage. All that really exists is a changed battery. So it is with the nervous system. It is changed by the selective action of environmental contingencies. Ordinary language, then, is not only a poor guide for science, but it harbours many illusions for the unwary. In a paper addressing the origins of cognitive terms, Skinner in 1989 noted the following. What is felt when one has a feeling is a condition of one's body, and the word used to describe it almost always comes from the word for the cause of the condition felt. The evidence is to be found in the history of language, in the etymology of words that refer to feelings. Etymology is the archaeology of thought. To describe great pain, for example, we say agony. The word first meant struggling or wrestling, a familiar cause of great pain. When other things felt the same way, the same word was used. A similar case is made here for the words we use to refer to states of mind or cognitive processes. They almost always began as references either to some aspect of behaviour or to the setting in which behaviour occurred. Only very slowly have they become the vocabulary of something called mind. Experience is a good example. As Raymond Williams pointed out, the word was not used to refer to anything felt or introspectively observed until the 19th century. Before that time it meant quite literally something a person had gone through, or what we should now call an exposure to contingencies of reinforcement. Storage and retrieval become much more complicated when we learn and recall how something is done. It is easy to make copies of things we see, but how can we make copies of things we do? We can model behaviour for someone to imitate, but a model cannot be stored. The traditional solution is to go digital. We say the organism learns and stores rules. When, for example, a hungry rat presses a lever and receives food, and the rate of pressing increases immediately, cognitive psychologists want to say that the rat has learned a rule. It now knows and can remember that pressing the lever produces food. But pressing the lever produces food is our description of the contingencies we have built into the apparatus. We have no reason to suppose that the rat formulates and stores such a description. The contingencies change the rat, which then survives as a changed rat. In this short video clip we see a classic example of another situation where the word knowledge is used. Does the child store knowledge of how to ride a bicycle? Is knowledge the explanation for his skill? Or is his history of exposure to the contingencies associated with riding a bike a better place to look for the explanation of his skill? Does his knowledge explain his ability to ride? It is his past interactions with the bicycle that are crucial for your current observations. Socially, we say, he has knowledge. Sound familiar? But this implies that his knowledge might be represented somehow in his mind. Or it could imply that his knowledge is somehow stored in his brain. Where is it? Here I want you to do the same thing that is shown in the short video clip. That is, I want you to personally examine your understanding of the terms future and past. Corolla. In your own time, I want you to close your eyes and think about the future. Again, in your own time, I want you to close your eyes and this time think about the past. In your own time, I want you to close your eyes and think about the future. When you're finished, I want you to open your eyes and then shortly afterwards, I want you to close them again and this time think about the past. The objective of this lesson for you is to understand the following conclusion. When a person either anticipates the future or remembers the past, they are in fact engaging in a particular kind of behaviour. Like all other behaviours, these behaviours have dimensions of frequency, duration and latency. In fact, from the moment you wake up, you spend quite a large proportion of your day engaged in them. Interestingly, your time spent futuring or pasting constitutes an activity in the present. Thus, when you watched the video clip, you saw on both occasions behaviour occurring in the present. Now use this analysis to see your own futuring and pasting behaviour in the same light. In other words, do as Skinner often suggested and adopt the perspective of someone watching you. Once you have fine-tuned your own self-awareness with respect to the goals of this exercise, you can now address some other issues. In everyday language, we often formulate explanations for behaviour by referring to events in the future. For example, she is doing her homework because the teacher will check it tomorrow. He is working hard because he will be getting his wages at the end of the month. The next time you come across this kind of explanation, either when used by someone else or when it spontaneously pops up in your own analysis of behaviour, you will know how to go beyond it. And that is, you will not be deceived into accepting the explanation offered by this explanatory fiction. Instead, you should conclude that the search for the explanation of behaviour has moved in the wrong direction. That is, it is mistaken to conclude that a person's behaviour is explained in terms that reference their consideration of what would happen in the future. Like all other behaviours, feelings of anticipation or thoughts about the future are events that take place in the present. How these events come to occur in the present in the way that they do is a question that in itself needs to be addressed. This analysis also extends to those occasions when there is a direct correlation between a predictive statement about a behaviour and the occurrence of that behaviour at a later date. It doesn't matter whether you make this predictive statement about your own behaviour or whether it is made by a scientist observing someone. In both instances, a human is engaged in behaviours that extend across time, and the conclusions therefore are to be considered as behaviours that can be investigated. This revelation has far-reaching implications because it means that we must find a way of determining what we mean by an explanation. In a natural science, we cannot accept explanations that are based on illusions or explanatory fictions. In a natural science, explanations are statements that describe functional relations between dependent and independent variables. More on this later. One particularly good example of a seemingly innocuous statement with profound implications is one that is made by virtually every beginning student of learning. Ivan Pavlov investigated the effects on dogs of establishing a relation between a bell and some food. After pairing the bell with food on a number of occasions, he found that the dogs eventually ended up salivating before the bell was rung. Technically, it is said that the dogs were conditioned to salivate to the sound of the bell. So what do students say? Well, they invariably say that the salivation occurs because the dog formed an association between the bell and the food. In other words, the students place the explanation for the behavior of salivating inside the dog's brain or in its mind. But if we look at it more closely, surely it was Pavlov who formed the association, not the dog. The dog salivated because of the association Pavlov arranged. Clicking on the icon of a dog at the bottom of the screen will take you to a tutorial in classical conditioning in which the errors of the student's analysis are exposed. After looking at this short video clip, what kind of statement would satisfy you as an acceptable explanation for the chicken's behavior? You saw the chicken moving freely and turning left after it looked at a sign with the word left written on it. If the same behavior had occurred with a person, you would probably conclude that the person could read. However, it does not make sense to say that the chicken can read. Probably not, but you might be more inclined to say this if the chicken was shown another sign with a different word like right written on it and it turned right. Notice how I say more inclined. I say this because it is your behavior that is of interest here. This is especially so given the probability that you have a history of using cognitive terms to explain behavior. I know the explanation for the chicken's behavior because I trained the chicken. Without an appropriate history, the chicken would not be turning left in the presence of the sign. However, it is when we don't know the environmental history of a behavior that mental surrogates, as Skinner called them, come to the surface in our language of explanation. One of these mental surrogates is the term representation. When used by non-behavioral psychologists, this term is singled out as providing a suitable explanation. The clip shown here is a play on the following analysis offered by Skinner in 1977. Sensory data are often said to be stored as images, much like the images said to represent the real world. Once inside, they are moved about for cognitive purposes. There is a familiar experiment at colour generalization in which a pigeon pecks at a disc of, say, green light, the behaviour being reinforced on a variable interval schedule. When a stable rate of responding develops, no further reinforcements are given, and the colour of the disc is changed. The pigeon responds to another colour at a rate which depends upon how much it differs from the original. Rather similar colours evoke fairly high rates, very different colours low rates. A cognitive psychologist might explain the matter in this way. The pigeon takes in a new colour as input, retrieves the original colour from memory, where it has been stored in some process form, puts the two coloured images side by side so that they may be easily compared, and after evaluating the difference, responds at the appropriate rate. But what advantage is gained by moving from a pigeon that responds to different colours on a disc to an inner pigeon that responds to coloured images in its mind. The simple fact is that because of a known history of reinforcement, different colours control different rates. Do we need to know what is going on inside the chicken's brain to have a more complete explanation of its behaviour? Well, it depends on what you mean by more complete. Without a complete understanding of reinforcement contingencies, you are unlikely to be able to bring the chicken to a point in time where it displays the kinds of behaviour shown here. It is these environmental contingencies that constitute the explanation for the behaviour. Looking inside the chicken's brain will give you more information on how the biology of the bird was changed by environmental contingencies. These changes are measures of a dependent variable in relation to the independent variables that were manipulated. Said another way, the coordinated changes that take place in the biology of the bird constitute the changes produced by the reinforcement contingencies. Brain science can examine these changes, but the findings do not explain the changes. To argue otherwise would be to create a circular argument that gets nowhere in the search for the underlying causes of the behaviour. One of Skinner's major contributions to the analysis of behaviour was his study of voluntary behaviour using schedules of reinforcement. In the video clip shown here, you see a rat on a schedule. The apparatus is programmed to deliver food pellets only when a response occurs after a certain period of time has elapsed since the previous food delivery. Now, most people aren't interested in the behaviour of rats, so why include the video clip here? Well, our primary reason is to use the clip as an opportunity for you to gauge the extent to which you formulate explanatory fictions. In a sense, we have created a mirror for you to gauge yourself. So go on, take a look at the clip and see if you can detect yourself inventing explanations for the rat's behaviour. For example, how many of these words from everyday language pop up in your analysis? Do you think that the rat is using his memory? That he is in eager anticipation? That he is clever or bored? Do you agree with the statement, the rat decided to press the lever because he knew that the right amount of time had elapsed? Remember, these are your words, if you've used them, that is. The rat can get on quite well without your analysis. In any case, whatever is going on inside the rat's head is sure not to be in the English language. If he's thinking at all, it probably goes something like beep, 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 beep. So here is another opportunity for you to see your scientific behaviour from a perspective of someone observing. Your use of everyday terms like those in your lay scientific analysis creates the illusion for you and for others listening to you. Usually they are reserved for explanations of behaviour that seem to spring up spontaneously without any prior stimulus. In his study of schedules, Skinner discovered that patterns of behaviour can be established over extended periods of time. Within the behavioural stream of such a pattern, discrete behaviours are meaningful insofar as they constitute elements of the pattern. Prior to Skinner's findings, scientists tried to explain the occurrence of discrete elements without referencing the environmental contingencies that were responsible for the whole pattern. Unfortunately, this practice still occurs in mainstream psychology. You will see examples of it in research that is more concerned with juggling cognitive terms instead of investigating the underlying environmental contingencies that control the behaviour. We have a long history of doing this, and many students have difficulty breaking the habit. Now, it doesn't particularly matter in the case of this rat, but if you can't break your habit here, then how will you know when this habit gets in the way of a situation where you have to be really careful in your analysis? say when analysing the behaviour of a child that presents behaviour problems, or when analysing the behaviour of any other person with whom you interact.
This figure shows the life of an individual to be a continuous process. Upon first meeting this person, we observe only a snapshot in his life. The image of a person as a process is difficult to retain. A consequence of this is that we usually engage in mentalistic analyses. That is, we attempt to explain a person's behavior by referring to something taking place inside him, in his brain or in his mind. A natural science perspective, however, enables us to retain the image of a person as a continuous process. From this perspective, the purpose of scientific inquiry is to relate segments of this continuous process to the independent variables that produce them. So-called mental events are part of the continuous process, not the explanation for what is observed.
There is a wonderful cliché that captures some of the essence of what it means to be alive, what it means to be a person. It is said that we are time travellers. As we meander in our journey through time and space, our development of a science of behaviour is a project that is fraught with many difficulties. In this section, we have touched on only some of them, problems caused when everyday vocabulary is incorporated into the practice of science. Currently, another major problem is the love affair that exists with the study of brain functioning. This is not to deny in any way that the study of the brain is not a crucial aspect of the project. There is a problem, though, if the data are collected at the expense of a more holistic approach, one that integrates changes in physiology with the context in which those changes are observed. Conceptually, the brain is often isolated from its surroundings. Why? Because people want to know which bits of the brain are responsible for controlling particular behaviours. But notice how I said that which bits of the brain are responsible for controlling behaviour? This sentence is already biased in its assumptions. Every observation of brain functioning involves an environmental context. When we map the changes in brain function, we need to formulate our conclusions so that they incorporate this fact. Put another way, if you want to see a particular part of the brain change in a particular way, you need to arrange a specific interaction with the environment. This conclusion presupposes that genetic history has already prepared the brain in some way for the changes that can be observed. To complicate matters, we must also take into consideration the history of interaction with the environment. Changes that take place at one point in time may affect subsequent changes that take place with further interactions with the environment. A case in point is the way the brain changes when sound waves reach it. This is not the place to go into physiology, but the point being made is that sound waves in and of themselves do not result in that complex behaviour we call communication or language. Again, this is too complex an issue to be dealt with here, but if you click at the icon at the bottom of the screen, you will be introduced to one branch of behaviour analysis that is making some headway in this area, the study of equivalence responding. This emerging research area is developing investigative procedures for studying complex behaviours that are often associated with language. We have here an imaginary scientific instrument that allows us to see all the brain activity we might possibly wish to see. Our goal as scientists is to arrange environmental contingencies to help us monitor changes in brain functioning as they occur in time. The data we collect will be put in this graph and will constitute what is called a functional relation. From this graph, we will be able to say that changes in brain function at a specific point in time are a function of the contingencies that were arranged. Now, all the data that might be collected in this way are data collected by someone else. What about the person doing the behaving? Let this animation run, and we will come back to this point. The animation will finish by simulating the perspective of the person from whom these kinds of data are collected. Here we see two perspectives. On the left, we see the perspective of the scientist as data are collected on the young girl walking down the street. On the right, we see the perspective of the young girl. So what gives? Well, earlier we touched briefly on the issue being addressed here. Do you remember the section on pasting and futuring? We noted there how adopting the perspective of another person can increase our self-awareness. The graphics here simply illustrate this argument. One of the many important insights that Skinner provided for the development of a science of behaviour is best expressed in a question. How did our parents teach us the words for things inside us that they themselves cannot see? How did they teach us, for example, all the words to describe the emotions that only we have access to? Why these questions are important is clear to see when we note the common mistake of assuming that feelings or the bodily conditions we feel are taken as the causes of behaviour. Or reports of feelings and the feelings themselves are together behaviours that require explaining. They are not answers. In Skinner's words, we may take feeling to be simply responding to stimuli, but reporting is the product of the verbal contingencies arranged by a community. There is a similar difference between behaving and reporting that one is behaving, or reporting the causes of one's behaviour. In arranging contingencies under which a person describes the public or private world in which he lives, a community generates that very special form of behaviour called knowing. Self-knowledge is of social origin. It is only when a person's private world becomes important to others that it is made important to him. It then enters into the control of behaviour called knowing. But self-knowledge has a special value to the individual himself. A person who has been made aware of himself by the questions he has been asked is in a better position to predict and control his own behaviour. This diagram is intended to capture one of the essential features of a natural science, that is the use of specialized observational techniques. In the diagram, the person is moving from the bottom right-hand corner of the screen to the top left-hand corner, and the microscope represents a specialized instrument for observing the changes that take place in the person's life. The kinds of questions that can be asked by the natural scientist include the following. What can be observed inside the skin? What can be observed from within the skin? And what can be observed by others on the outside? One way of bringing all these questions together is to use a definition of behaviour that is rather unusual, but at the same time captures the essence of a holistic perspective. That definition of behaviour looks like this. Behaviour is anything a dead person cannot do.
By systematically varying the conditions under which behavior is observed, we can uncover general principles. These principles are basically statements that say the following. Under these circumstances, the behavior is likely to appear in this way. Systematic experimentation has helped us to uncover several basic dimensions of behavior, and in a moment we will look at two of these. All events exist in time, and that allows us to measure the dimension of duration. But we can also look at the frequency with which a behavior occurs, and there are clues to this aspect of our understanding of behavior in our everyday language. So for example, when we say that a person is diligent, we mean that they study a lot. In essence, this is reference to the dimension of frequency, where we're actually counting the number of times somebody does something.